I was in a pharmacy yesterday, just standing near the counter, and I watched this woman, visibly pregnant, staring at the wall of pain relievers. It's a familiar scene, right? She picked up a box of Tylenol, turned it over, and just held it. She didn't look convinced. She looked anxious.
Yeah.
She pulled out her phone, typed something, and stood there scrolling. After a minute, she put the Tylenol back on the shelf. Then she picked up the Advil, read the warning, put that back too.
Oh, wow.
Finally, she just sighed, rubbed her temples, and walked away empty-handed. That tiny moment just stuck with me. Tylenol. Acetaminophen. It's the one thing doctors have told pregnant women for generations is the safe bet.
The standard advice, yeah.
It's not just a drug. It's a symbol of medical consensus, a household staple you don't even think about. But I had this sinking feeling I knew exactly what she was seeing on her phone.
Right. Not the official guidance.
No, it wouldn't have been a dry, nuanced report from the American College of Obstetricians. It was almost certainly a clip. A political leader standing at a podium, using that tone of absolute certainty, telling a crowd, don't take it. Dead or alive, don't take it.
Oh.
A statement that scientists and doctors have overwhelmingly said is not based on causal evidence. A statement that an ex-Surgeon General called dangerous.
Exactly. Dangerous.
And yet there it was, powerful enough to stop that woman in her tracks and make her choose pain over trusting the system. It was the perfect picture of how this works. This isn't about science anymore. It's about turning a medicine cabinet into a battlefield.
That observation is, well, it's profoundly important because the anxiety that drove that woman to walk away empty-handed, that's the successful outcome of a calculated campaign.
Right. Success for someone anyway.
It demonstrates the profound erosion of institutional trust. Our core mission today, really, is to analyze the strategic weaponization of scientific uncertainty, especially how populist leaders use it to create these parallel information ecosystems.
Parallel realities, almost.
Pretty much. We need to unpack the complex mechanisms, the political, the psychological, the technological, that have allowed deeply entrenched scientific consensus, like the basic safety of Tylenol, to be destabilized so quickly.
So quickly is the key part there.
Critically, yeah. We have to examine how this organized doubt is manufactured and how it creates severe public health and, frankly, financial risks.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have this perfect storm of forces attacking shared reality. But maybe we should start with the technological element, because that feels like the accelerant.
Absolutely.
AI didn't just speed up misinformation. It seems like it fundamentally changed its nature and its scale.
You've hit it exactly. We are in a new era defined by velocity. Misinformation isn't slow-moving anymore. It's instantaneous, customizable, and terrifyingly easy to produce at scale.
Cheaper, too, I imagine.
Oh, dramatically. The introduction of generative AI has made producing synthetic content, whether it's sophisticated text, deepfake audio, manipulated video, or those subtly wrong images. It's cheaper, faster, and frighteningly easy to deploy against specific targets.
And you're seeing this happen more?
Definitely. Digital threat analysts are tracking a sharp rise in these campaigns, and they're specifically targeting heavily regulated and essential industries. Finance, pharma, energy, critical infrastructure.
The pace of this change is what really worries me, because it seems the time required to debunk a lie is now fundamentally longer than the time required for that lie to cause real economic damage.
That is the essential insight, that gap. Consider the real-world example from May 2023, that fake AI-generated image of the Pentagon on fire.
I remember that. It caused a bit of a panic.
More than a bit. That single synthetic image caused the Dow to drop 85 points in just 4 minutes. 4 minutes. The financial market, running on algorithms, reacted to a completely fabricated reality faster than any human analyst or news organization could possibly verify the source or the content.
So the damage is done before the truth can even get its boots on.
Precisely. That gap, the delta between instantaneous impact and human verification, that's the new vulnerability. Experts believe we've now entered an era where a single, well-placed fake video or synthetic image can wipe millions, potentially billions, from a brand's market value in minutes.
So this isn't just trolls making memes. This is an immediate operational financial threat. It needs a name, right? This brings us to this concept you mentioned, uncertainty weaponization tactics, or UWT.
Exactly. We must define this clearly. UWT isn't just accidental falsehood like someone...
Can you give us a clear picture of how UWT functions in practice? Especially, say, in a sustainability context where the science can be complex. How do they confuse the issue strategically?
Sure. In environmental and regulatory battles, a classic UWT move is to commission or fund studies specifically designed to generate conflicting or, confusing results about the severity of an impact. Let's say industrial pollution or climate change effects.
Okay, so not denying the problem exists entirely, but muddying the waters about how bad it is.
Precisely. The strategic goal isn't necessarily to find truth or even to deny the initial problem. Instead, it's to shift the regulatory focus away from the core issue, the pollution itself, onto the severity of its impact. This creates a perpetual scientific debate.
And that debate causes delays.
Exactly. It's regulatory gold for the industry involved. By endlessly debating whether the acceptable toxicity level is precisely 5 parts per million or 6 parts per million, the industry successfully delays regulatory action, enforcement, or the need for expensive structural changes, potentially for years, decades even.
So the goal is regulatory paralysis dressed up as rigorous scientific disagreement. And you mentioned that corporate stakes extend far beyond just PR damage, right? It hits the bottom line, security.
Oh, the risks are enterprise-wide, and they are evolving rapidly thanks to deepfakes. Beyond stock volatility and reputation hits, we are tracking sophisticated deepfake attacks that result in direct financial fraud.
How?
Well, for instance, synthetic voices or videos of senior executives have been used successfully to convince employees in finance departments to transfer substantial sums to fake accounts.
No way.
Yes, all under the guise of an urgent, maybe late-night call from the CEO. It sounds real. It looks real enough on a quick video call.
That's terrifying.
It is. And we also see regulatory compliance risks, particularly around ESG misstatements. False narratives, often seeded by, say, foreign state actors or partisan interests, might prompt regulatory reviews or even class action lawsuits based on manufactured outrage.
Do we have specific recent examples? Brands being actively targeted by these campaigns?
We do. Several examples highlight the diversity of targets. Consider first a prominent German pharmaceutical brand. They were recently forced to mount a widespread fact-check campaign. Why?
What happened?
They faced persistent, false, and widely circulating allegations linking the company to historical Agent Orange production.
Agent Orange. But wasn't that settled history?
Exactly. It wasn't a new controversy. It was an old, settled issue. But it was weaponized, likely amplified by AI tools to spread quickly, and resurrected completely out of context specifically to attack brand trust now.
A tactic designed for instant moral outrage, even if it's historically inaccurate or misleading.
Yeah.
What about something more current, maybe targeting innovation?
Yes. The second case is really instructive because it targets a progressive, ESG-positive initiative. A Danish-Swedish company faced rapidly escalating business-critical risks due to false claims about health risks posed by their new feed additives.
Feed additives for
cows. And here's the kicker. These additives were designed specifically to reduce methane output from cows, a pro-sustainability, pro-climate measure.
So they were trying to do something good for the environment.
Exactly. But the disinformation campaign completely ignored the environmental benefit. It focused instead on totally non-existent human or animal health hazards. It directly threatened a core business line that was meant to be their forward-looking, responsible profit center.
Wow. So even trying to be responsible doesn't shield you.
Not at all. These attacks show that even acting responsibly, pursuing ESG goals, does not protect you from being targeted by organized disinformation. It's quite disturbing.
It is. It reveals that the same tools can be used to attack public health, financial stability, and even sincere attempts at corporate responsibility. But if the lies are moving faster than the fact checkers, that brings us to the deeper, more worrying psychological question. Why? Why are these synthetic lies often so much more persuasive than the verifiable truth?
This is where we really need to transition from the technology to the psychological battlefield. For too long, I think, the scientific community operated under what's called the information deficit model.
Which is the idea that people just need more facts.
Basically, yeah. The assumption was that people deny science simply because they lack the correct information. So the implied solution was straightforward. Just give them more facts, better charts, clearer explanations, and they'll come around.
Which, as we've seen countless times, just doesn't work, especially not lately.
Not only does it often fail, but in many cases, providing corrective scientific evidence can actively backfire. There's a phenomenon known as the boomerang effect.
You mean telling someone the facts makes them believe the opposite even more strongly.
That's exactly it. Studies show that when presented with information contradicting their core beliefs, some denialists can become more entrenched in their initial position. Sometimes they even reduce their intent to take positive actions, like getting vaccinated after being shown corrective info.
So it's not about understanding the science.
It's generally not an issue of scientific comprehension or literacy. The deeper, more primal issue seems to be intergroup conflict. Peter Hotez, a well-known vaccine researcher, has explicitly described vaccine hesitancy today not as just random individual doubts, but as an organized political movement.
Okay, so the denial is fundamentally about loyalty to a group, not really about the accuracy of the data itself. Is this where social identity theory comes in?
Precisely. Social identity theory, or SIT, gives us the framework. Humans derive a fundamental part of their identity from the groups they belong to. It might be based on political affiliation, like conservatives or liberals, religious belief, environmental activism, or even a subculture like video gamers.
Okay.
Now, if scientific findings, or maybe even the scientists presenting those findings, are perceived as threatening that valued social identity, what happens?
People push back.
They engage in denial to protect the in-group. It's essentially a defense mechanism for tribal belonging. The science becomes secondary to protecting the identity.
I need to really grasp the power of this. Do we have experimental proof? Like, can simply reminding someone of their group identity actually change how they view a scientific fact?
We do, and the results are pretty compelling, frankly. Researchers have conducted studies where they explicitly manipulated or primed a group identity. For instance, they found that simply priming political conservative identification.
Just making them think about being conservative.
Yes. That simple prime caused participants to increase their rejection and derogation of scientific research, specifically climate change research in that study. They didn't even have to argue the point. They just had to make the participant think about their team, essentially.
So just making them mentally put on that political or cultural jersey was enough to make them reject a scientific consensus if that consensus challenged their group's established worldview.
That's what the evidence suggests. Now, critically, the priming mechanism didn't necessarily create denial out of thin air, but it acted as a massive force multiplier for existing skepticism.
Ah, okay. It boosts what's already there.
Exactly. A meta-analysis looking across multiple domains, climate change, vaccination, studies on violent video game effects, showed that this social identity priming had denial effects of a moderate to large magnitude. The statistic they use, D plus equals 0.39, might sound academic, but in real-world terms.
It means identity is a big deal.
It means identity isn't just some minor variable. It's a powerful, proven accelerator for pre-existing doubt. It reinforces the skepticism that's already bubbling under the surface, turning a mild uncertainty into a firm, defended stance.
This explains so much about why arguing about facts often feels completely pointless. You're not attacking a belief. You're perceived as attacking someone's core social identity.
You better.
And often that psychological defense translates into outright hostility or aggression toward the messenger, the scientist, which brings us to intergroup threat theory.
That's the next logical step, yes. Denialists often categorize scientists, or the scientific establishment, as a hostile outgroup.
An us versus them kind of thing.
Exactly. And this outgroup is perceived as posing what social psychologists call a symbolic threat. This means the threat isn't necessarily physical, but it's seen as endangering the in-group's valued worldview, their fundamental values, their standards, their way of life.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think of a climate scientist whose research implies lifestyle changes or regulations that challenge the identity or livelihood of someone working in the fossil fuel industry, or someone whose identity is strongly tied to, say, unrestricted driving. That scientist's work poses a symbolic threat.
Okay, I see. And what happens psychologically when that symbolic threat is activated?
Well, research shows that when perceived intergroup threat from scientists was experimentally heightened, it predicted significantly more negative evaluations of the research itself. But it also predicted more pronounced feelings of anger.
Anger, specifically.
Yes, anger. And crucially, it also predicted more negative behavioral intentions. This means people became more willing to take actions against the science or the scientists, like signing petitions to cut research funding or actively protesting scientific findings.
So let me get this straight. If I identify strongly with my group, and I perceive a scientist's research as fundamentally threatening my group's way of life or core values, my gut reaction is anger.
Often.
And that anger then motivates me to actively fight the scientist or the science, even if the fight has no direct personal benefit to me beyond defending my group identity.
That is the precise mechanism identified in several studies, and anger seems to be the crucial psychological mediator driving that reaction.
Wow.
One study demonstrated this really clearly by experimentally heightening intergroup threat for highly identified video gamers regarding research into violent video game effects.
What did they find?
Those gamers didn't just disagree more strongly, they expressed significantly more anger toward the researchers and, importantly, became more willing to sign anti-science petitions aimed at blocking future research in that area.
So the anger fuels the action.
Exactly. It reveals that aggressive, anti-science behavior isn't just random trolling online. It's often psychologically mediated by that feeling of intergroup anger, an anger that is politically and culturally exploitable by those who want to sow doubt.
Okay, the confluence of these forces, the speed of AI disinformation crashing into these deep-seated group identity defenses, makes it much clearer why scientific consensus feels so fragile today. But this isn't entirely new, is it? We have historical examples of how truly catastrophic things become when political ideology completely displaces scientific evidence in public health.
History should be our loudest warning siren here. It repeatedly shows that when public health leadership stumbles, or worse, is deliberately guided by ideology over evidence, the consequences are absolutely catastrophic. And the repercussions don't stay local, they amplify globally and can last for generations.
Let's look at two really devastating case studies you mentioned that illustrate these profound societal costs. Starting with the HIV crisis in South Africa in the late 1990s and early 2000s.
Yes, this stands as one of the great public health tragedies driven almost entirely by political denialism at the highest levels. Despite overwhelming global scientific consensus linking the HIV virus to AIDS, the South African government at the time, under President Mbeki, rejected that evidence outright.
What did they claim instead?
Officials, including the health minister, publicly attributed the burgeoning AIDS crisis to poverty, malnutrition, and general toxicity. They completely dismissed the viral link, even bringing known AIDS denialists into government advisory roles.
And the practical impact of this denial.
They actively delayed the rollout of life-saving antiretroviral therapy, art medicine, that was proven to work and was becoming available.
And what were they promoting instead of proven medicine? Was it just inaction?
Oh, it was worse than inaction. They were actively promoting ideological and completely unproven alternatives, effectively mocking established medicine in the process. Government officials championed supposed remedies like garlic, lemon juice, beetroot, even African potatoes. Seriously. This reinforced deep skepticism toward the Western medicine that could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Rigorous studies later estimated that this governmental denialism led directly to over 330,000 preventable deaths during that crucial period.
330,000 people.
At least. But the damage went even further than the immediate tragic loss of life. It severely fractured public trust in the national health system itself, making future health initiatives, even basic vaccination campaigns, incredibly difficult to implement. It cast a long shadow that lingers to this day.
That's a staggering cost of ideology overpowering evidence. The second historical example you pointed to involves the resurgence of polio in Nigeria. This shows how even localized, manufactured misinformation can derail huge global health efforts, right?
Exactly. The Nigeria polio vaccine boycotts, which really took hold around 2003, perfectly illustrate how conspiracy theories can weaponize existing cultural distrust. In northern Nigeria, certain local religious and political leaders began spreading the narrative that the oral polio vaccine, OPV,
which was part of a global eradication effort.
Right, a massive, generally successful global effort. They claimed this vaccine was not a health intervention, but part of a secret Western plot, specifically a sterilization agenda designed to reduce the Muslim population.
And people believed this.
This fear-mongering took root surprisingly quickly, especially in some northern states like Kano. It led to widespread boycotts of the vaccination teams. Parents literally hid their children.
And the consequence of that breakdown in trust?
The immediate consequence was a terrifying resurgence of polio within Nigeria. Cases shot up. But it didn't start there. Nigeria became a reservoir for the virus, complicating international eradication efforts across the continent.
So it spread outwards again.
Yes. The outbreak allowed the disease to spill over borders and reinfect previously polio-free regions across Africa and even further afield. That narrative, steeped in mistrust of external influence and cultural paranoia, proved fundamentally more powerful in that context than the life-saving vaccine itself. It showed just how quickly decades of global progress can be undone by organized doubt.
Which brings us squarely back to the present day, because the institutional erosion we're discussing now isn't just organic public skepticism bubbling up. It seems to be actively mobilized and funded by modern political forces.
That is the essential insight for understanding today's landscape. The anti-science movement hasn't just grown, it's become increasingly organized, sophisticated, and well-funded.
How does that operate?
It strategically pairs health misinformation about vaccines, about COVID, about other treatments, with powerful appeals to anti-government ideologies. Things like medical freedom, personal liberty, parental rights. It reframes basic public health measures as authoritarian overreach.
And this is creating a measurable divide.
Absolutely. We are witnessing a profound and rapidly widening partisan rift across core health beliefs, things that used to be largely non-controversial.
And the data on this rift is shocking, isn't it? Particularly around vaccines.
It really is. Consider support for mandatory childhood vaccine rules, like for measles.
Yeah.
Among Republicans in the U.S., that support dropped drastically from nearly 80% in 2019 to less than 60% today, just a few years.
Wow, a 20-point drop.
Meanwhile, Democratic support has remained steady, up around 85%. That staggering drop on one side of the aisle in such a short time shows the success of this political mobilization. Support for what were once seen as non-negotiable public health standards has become a core political wedge issue.
And this shift wasn't random, was it? It feels like it was deliberately fueled by political leaders capitalizing on public resentment, especially towards pandemic measures like masking, closures, and mandates.
Absolutely. The political climate was cultivated, you could say. It was created by leaders mobilizing constituents who genuinely resented the restrictions imposed during the pandemic.
I remember the rhetoric.
Exactly. When then-President Donald Trump openly mocked Joe Biden for wearing a mask during a 2020 debate, it was more than just a personal jab. It was a powerful symbolic act. It signaled to his base that compliance with public health directives was a sign of weakness or even political opposition.
And that opened the door for more extreme views.
It created a climate that has now allowed previously fringe, radical, anti-science ideas to enter the mainstream political platform.
And now we actually see presidential candidates lending airtime to anti-vaccine messages, or figures known for questioning scientific consensus being seriously considered for top health positions.
This is the strategic climax, if you will, of the erosion process. When political power is concentrated in figures who campaign on promises to dismantle or fundamentally change these institutions, the credibility of those institutions immediately suffers. We've seen presidential candidates vow to gut the CDC or consider nominating known vaccine skeptics to lead the FDA.
The very agencies responsible for the science.
The very institutions responsible for approving drugs and vaccines and advising on public health measures. When right-wing politicians and their associated media platforms establish themselves as the primary authoritative information source for their base, the integrity and credibility of agencies like the FDA and CDC are fundamentally and intentionally eroded.
So the goal is disruption.
This systematic attack is designed ultimately to make evidence-based policy impossible, or at least politically toxic.
So if the public health system itself is under such a deliberate attack, we have to look at the broader infrastructure that fuels this organized erosion of trust. The systemic attack on shared reality itself. You called it the illiberal communication logic.
Yes, that's a useful frame. What we're seeing is essentially two competing systems of communication in fundamental conflict right now in many democracies.
Okay, what's the traditional one?
Liberal democratic communication, traditionally, relies on certain norms. Reason, evidence, debate, a degree of civility, inclusion. And it typically involves a professional press corps mediating multi-sided reasoned debate to inform the public. This system ideally allows for resolving differences and, crucially, allows citizens to accept policy outcomes as legitimate because they appear evidence-based and debated openly.
But the illiberal communication logic just throws that whole playbook out the window.
It rejects reasoned debate entirely. The illiberal logic, which is championed by many populist movements and heavily supported by systemic disinformation campaigns, doesn't seek debate. It attacks opponents personally, attacks public authorities, attacks the press itself. It mobilizes transgressive actions based on emotion, resentment, and group identity.
And it wants to replace the old sources of information.
Yes. This logic seeks to replace traditional expert institutions and the legacy press with partisan political figures and their allied media as the sole authoritative information sources. We saw this perfectly exemplified in the prolific use of terms like alternative facts, That wasn't just a gaffe, it was a strategic move to delegitimize the fundamental concept of a commonly shared reality based on verifiable evidence.
And this shift creates immediate and really harsh dilemmas for businesses, especially those trying to operate responsibly, right? Thinking specifically about corporate social responsibility, CSR, and this whole ESG investing trend.
Oh, CSR and ESG are caught directly in the crosshairs because the illiberal communication spheres, particularly in the US, have successfully framed ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing as woke capitalism.
A political weapon.
Exactly. Or as an attack on freedom and traditional markets. This is a highly effective strategic disinformation campaign targeting the financial sector. Financial firms that previously championed ESG, seeing it as good long-term risk management, are now facing intense political and financial heat.
Can you give an example of how this political warfare actually translates into corporate consequences?
Sure, look at BlackRock's CEO Larry Fink. He was arguably one of the most prominent global proponents of integrating ESG factors into investment analysis. As a result, he was subjected to incredibly organized demonization, relentless personal attacks, and political pressure from groups opposing responsible investing.
And did it have business impact?
Well, perhaps even more significantly, look at Vanguard, another financial giant. They publicly pulled out of the Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance, a major pro-ESG initiative, after facing significant political pushback and threats of divestment from Republican-led states. It demonstrates that this kind of political pressure, fueled by disinformation, works. It has teeth.
So this pressure works to slow down the entire movement toward responsible investing, even if many investors still want it.
It absolutely does. Now, it's not completely stopping it. Roughly half of the explicitly anti-ESG bills introduced in U.S. red states failed to pass in 2023. But the campaign persists, and critically, it undermines the overall trend by creating profound uncertainty and fear of political retribution within corporate boardrooms.
So companies are caught in the middle.
They're forced to navigate two entirely conflicting realities: the reality of climate science and increasing investor demand for sustainable options versus the politically amplified reality of woke capitalism, outrage, and potential legislative punishment.
If we trace this strategic intent behind this kind of doubt creation back, we can identify corporate interests that basically pioneered this playbook decades ago, perfecting the method of generating uncertainty for political gain.
Absolutely. The historical infrastructure, the playbook for strategic disinformation, really finds its modern roots in the fossil fuel industry, particularly companies like ExxonMobil. They have a documented decades-long history of using strategic disinformation to defend their core business model against climate science.
And their playbook followed a specific pattern, didn't it? It wasn't just denial.
No, it was a calculated, incremental progression designed entirely for delay. It's quite sophisticated when you break it down.
Walk us through that progression, because it feels like a template for so much modern disinformation.
It really is. Stage 1, outright denial. Claim the issue, climate change doesn't exist at all, when that becomes untenable.
Stage 2.
Stage 2, question the science. Acknowledge the data might exist, but cast doubt on its accuracy, the methodology, the models. Create uncertainty about the science itself. Stage 3. Claim it's not human-caused. Shift the blame to natural cycles, sunspots, anything but industrial emissions. If that doesn't hold.
Stage 4 must be minimizing it.
Exactly. Stage 4, question the severity. Argue the impact won't be as bad as scientists predict or that there are benefits. And finally, Stage 5, the ultimate delay tactic. Suggest it's simply not the right time to act, or that any action proposed will unfairly punish the economy, or that technology will solve it later.
It's a systematic, multi-stage erosion of certainty.
Precisely. And it's the blueprint for creating that perpetual regulatory paralysis we talked about earlier. Keep the debate alive indefinitely.
And this model, this playbook, it isn't just confined to one industry or one country anymore, is it? It feels like it's been exported globally, maybe by organizations designed specifically to distribute this kind of partisan ideology.
That is the crucial modern element, yes. The global spread of systemic disinformation, particularly around climate and economic policy, is strongly supported and amplified by globally networked neoliberal think tanks. The most prominent example is probably the Atlas Network.
What is the Atlas Network?
It's a network consisting of over 500 aligned organizations, think tanks, and advocacy groups globally. They're often funded by corporations and wealthy individuals who generally favor minimal government regulation and free markets.
But they call themselves think tanks.
They do, But functionally, many observers argue they operate far more like partisan lobbying shops and policy delivery groups rather than neutral academic research centers.
Meaning they produce policy proposals that fit an agenda, perhaps with less regard for evidence or social consequence, and then they hand them off to politicians.
That seems to be the model. They often take funding from corporate interests or ideological donors to produce communication plans, model legislation, and ready-made policy proposals for politicians to enact. Often, critics argue, with little detailed consideration for the potential social consequences or the credibility of the underlying justifications.
Is there a concrete example of this in action?
A high-profile recent example, cited by critics, was the alleged role of Atlas Network-affiliated groups in engineering the economic programs that led to the rapid demise of the short-lived Liz Truss government in the UK.
The chaotic experiment with unfunded tax cuts that crashed the value of the pound almost immediately.
That's the one. Many analysts saw it as a direct, measurable consequence of attempting to implement an extreme free market ideology that had been developed and promoted by these networked think tanks without adequate grounding in economic reality or political feasibility.
So the ultimate goal is ideological implementation.
The ultimate goal of this network, broadly speaking, appears to be the global promotion of unregulated markets and minimal social roles for government. And achieving this often politically unpopular agenda seems to rely heavily on sustained, technologically amplified, and psychologically targeted disinformation campaigns designed to undermine trust in alternative approaches and regulatory bodies. So when we synthesize everything we've discussed, from the instant velocity of AI-generated fakes to the highly coordinated infrastructure of something like the Atlas Network, it all converges back on the anxiety you described in that pharmacy.
That pregnant woman.
Exactly. Her decision to walk away from Tylenol wasn't an isolated, ill-informed personal choice. It was, in many ways, the intended outcome, the result of a calculated, organized, and technologically amplified strategy.
A strategy designed to create that very anxiety.
Yes. A strategy that weaponizes uncertainty and exploits those deep psychological vulnerabilities we talked about, the ones rooted in group identity and threat perception. Her anxiety, her hesitation, is the perfect, albeit tragic, measure of the success of the systems we've just analyzed. We as a society are essentially paying a massive public health cost, and sometimes a financial one, for the political or commercial advantage of a relatively small number of actors.
That is a chilling synthesis. Because when we view the issue through this much wider lens, we realize the ultimate objective here isn't just to discredit one specific scientific fact, like the safety of a particular vaccine or drug, or even just to delay one piece of environmental legislation.
No, it's bigger than that.
The deeper, more insidious objective seems to be to undermine our very capacity for collective, evidence-based decision-making itself. If we cannot agree on simple, shared facts about public health or the environment or the economy facts that used to be taken for granted, then we lose the ability to act collectively for the public welfare. And if that happens, the machinery of a functioning democracy, which relies on some level of shared reality to operate, just grinds to a halt. The battle for shared facts really does define our reality, doesn't it?